It's a Spotify podcast.
You pushed me down, thought I'd stay on the ground, counting me.
Close the room. Have you ever noticed that silence makes people uncomfortable? Think about that. Two people step into an elevator. When the doors close, nobody says anything. 5 seconds pass, then almost automatically, someone starts talking. Not because they had something important to say, not because the conversation needed to happen, simply because silence felt uncomfortable. Why? Why does an empty room feel louder than a crowded one? Why do people rush to feel the quiet? Why does a pause sometimes create more anxiety than an argument? Now think about your own life. How many times have you answered a question before you completely understood it? How many times have you apologized just to end the tension? How many times have you agreed simply because someone kept waiting for your answer? Think about that. Sometimes the pressure isn't in the words, it's in the silence between them. Here's something I didn't understand for a long time. Most people think communication is about talking. I don't. I think communication is about thinking. And thinking requires space. Space requires time. Time often arrives wearing the disguise of silence. Some of the biggest mistakes people ever make don't happen because they spoke. They happen because they spoke too soon. They reacted before they reflected. They defended themselves before understanding the accusation. They explained before anyone asked. They surrendered before anyone demanded it. Think about that. The words weren't the problem. The timing was. Here's another question. Who benefits when you answer immediately? Sometimes you do. An emergency, a fire, a child running into traffic. Life occasionally demands instant action, but most conversations aren't emergencies. Most decisions don't expire because somebody looked at you for 5 seconds. I've learned something that completely changed the way I communicate. The person controls the pace, often controls the conversation. Not because they're louder, not because they're smarter, because they're thinking. While everyone else is reacting, my name is Leroy Nellis. This is Resilience Radio. Today we're talking about one of the quietest forms of strength, silence. Not silence because you're afraid. Silence because you're disciplined. Silence because you've learned that every thought doesn't deserve immediate words. Not every accusation requires an immediate defense. Not every opinion requires a rebuttal. Sometimes the strongest response is a pause. Let's get into it. Why silence makes people uncomfortable. Let's start with something simple. Imagine I ask you a question, then I don't say another word. I just look at you. How do you feel? A little uncomfortable? Maybe. A little anxious? Maybe. You suddenly feel responsible for filling the silence? Why? Because human beings are pattern seekers. Conversation has rhythm. Question, answer, question, answer. When that rhythm breaks, your brain notices. It starts searching for an explanation. Did I say something wrong? Are they angry? Did they not hear me? Are they judging me? Notice something. None of those explanations came from evidence. They came from your imagination. Silence creates uncertainty. And the human brain doesn't like uncertainty. It would often rather invent an explanation than wait patiently for the real one. Think about that. How many misunderstandings have started because somebody guessed instead of asking? Here's something interesting. The quiet itself isn't uncomfortable. Our interpretation of the quiet is. One person hears silence and thinks they're thinking. Another hears silence and thinks they're upset. Same silence, different story. We've talked before about controlling your narrative. This is another example. Your brain is writing a story about something that hasn't even happened yet. This is why silence can become one of your greatest teachers, because silence shows you what your mind does when it doesn't have enough information. Does it become curious? Does it become fearful? Does it wait? Or does it assume? That's worth paying attention to, because the stories we invent during silence often tell us more about ourselves than about the other person. I want to introduce you to something I call the silence gap. Think of it as the space between what happens and what you choose to do next. Most people don't even know that space exists. Something happens, someone criticizes them, they react, someone insults them, they react, someone pressures them, they react. It feels automatic, almost mechanical. Stimulus, response. Think about that. For a lot of people, their emotions have become their reflexes, and reflexes are incredibly fast, sometimes too fast. Now imagine something different. Imagine someone says, "I can't believe you do something like that." The old version of you might answer immediately, "What are you talking about? I didn't do anything. What? That's not fair." Now you're moving emotionally. The conversation has already accelerated. But what if instead you paused 3 seconds, not 30, not 3 minutes, just 3 seconds? Did you feel that? Those 3 seconds probably felt longer than they actually were. That's because silence stretches time, and time changes thinking. Those 3 seconds give your brain a chance to catch up with your emotions. Instead of reacting, you begin observing what exactly they say. What emotion am I feeling? What are they actually asking? What outcome are they trying to create? Notice something. Nothing changed except the pause. But suddenly, you have options, and options are where freedom begins. The 3-second rule. Here's one of the simplest habits I have ever learned, and one of the most valuable. Whenever someone asks you a difficult question, don't answer immediately. Pause. 3 seconds. Not because you're playing games, not because you're trying to intimidate anyone, because you're giving yourself permission to think. Think about how rare that is today. We live in a world that rewards speed, instant messages, instant opinions, instant outrage, instant responses. Somehow we've confused fast with wise, but they're not the same thing. A fast answer can still be a bad answer. A slow answer can save a relationship, or a business, or a lawsuit, or a career. Imagine someone says, "So, are you saying this is all my fault?" Your first instinct might be, "No, that's not what I'm saying." Now you've accepted their frame. The conversation is already moving where they wanted it to go. Instead, pause. Then ask, "Can you help me understand what made you ask that?" Notice what happened. You didn't become defensive. You became curious. Curiosity slows conflict. Defensiveness usually speeds it up. In a disagreement, don't focus on the words. Watch the pace. Who's talking faster? Who's interrupting? Who's rushing? Who's demanding an answer right now? Because pace creates pressure, and pressure changes decisions. Think about the negotiation. One person says, "I need your answer today." Maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. But notice what just entered the room. A clock. Now you're no longer evaluating the decision, you're racing against time. That's pressure. Now imagine the other person says, "I'd like to think about it." Everything changes. The pace changes. The emotional temperature changes. The conversation changes. Think about that. Sometimes the most powerful sentences in a negotiation isn't yes. It isn't no. It's, "I need some time to think." Manipulators understand pace. Salespeople understand pace. Good negotiators understand pace. Interrogators understand pace. Therapists understand pace. Judges understand pace. The question is, do you? Because if someone else is controlling how fast you think, they're already influencing how well you think. Silence reveals things. Here's something fascinating. People often reveal more after silence than before it. Imagine someone makes an accusation. You don't interrupt. You don't defend yourself. You simply listen. Then you say nothing. Something interesting happens. Many people keep talking. They explain. They add details. Sometimes they even contradict themselves. Why? Because silence creates space, and human beings naturally want to fill empty space. This is one reason great interviewers don't rush to ask the next question. They wait. Great detectives wait. Great therapists wait. Great negotiators wait. Not because silence is magical, because silence invites people to keep talking. And the more someone talks, the more information you have. Remember, you don't learn much while you're talking. You always know what you're going to say. You learn when you're listening. Sometimes silence isn't empty. Sometimes it's gathering evidence. The listening ledger. I want to challenge something most of us were taught. We've been told that being a good communicator means being a good speaker. I don't think that's true. I think the best communicators are usually the best listeners. There's a difference. Listening isn't waiting for your turn to talk. Listening is collecting information. Think about that. How often has someone started talking and before they finished, you already knew what you were going to say? You weren't listening. You were loading. You weren't listening. You were loading your response. We've all done it. I know I have. Someone says, "You never listen to me." And before they finish, you're already thinking, "That's not true." Now you're preparing your defense. But what if instead you become curious? What makes you feel that way? Notice something: you haven't agreed. You haven't apologized. You haven't surrendered. You've simply asked for understanding. Understanding always comes before resolution. The listening ledger. Here's another framework. I call it the listening ledger. Whenever someone is talking, keep track of these 3 things. Not just what they're saying, listen for facts, feelings, and requests. Those 3 things are often mixed together. Someone says, "You never make time for me." What's the fact? Maybe you missed dinner last week. What's the feeling? They feel ignored. What's the request? They want more time together. See the difference? If you only hear the accusation, you'll defend yourself. If you hear the request, you can solve the problem. Most arguments continue because people argue about the words instead of discovering the need underneath them. Think about that. Sometimes people don't need a debate. They need to feel heard. Silence makes pressure visible. Here's something I started noticing. Pressure hates silence. Imagine someone says, "I need an answer right now." Instead of answering, you pause. 3-second pause. What usually happens? They start talking again. "This isn't complicated. I don't know why you're hesitating. I thought you cared." Notice what's happening. The pressure is becoming visible. Before it feels like urgency, now you can actually see it. Think about that. Silence doesn't create pressure. Silence reveals it. That's why people who are trying to rush you often become uncomfortable. When you slow down, you're interpreting their Now we're talking about facts, not urgency. Imagine someone says, "If you really love me, you'd already know." Pause. Then ask, "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Again, specificity. Pressure hates specificity. Fog loves emotion. Clarity changes everything. Don't win the next sentence. I used to think every conversation was sometimes I needed to win. Maybe you felt that too. Someone says something wrong, you immediately correct it. Someone misunderstands you, you immediately explain. Someone accuses you, you immediately defend yourself. I thought if I could just find the perfect words, everything would make more sense. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't, because I eventually realized not everyone is searching for understanding. Some people are searching for victory. Those are different goals. If someone wants understanding, facts usually help. If someone wants victory, facts become obstacles. Think about that. You can present perfect evidence, perfect logic, perfect reasoning, and still not change someone's mind. Why? Because their conclusion was never built on evidence. It was built on emotion. And emotion rarely surrenders to one clever sentence. That's why I stopped trying to win the next sentence. Instead, I started asking a different question. What's the best decision for the next hour? I noticed the difference. I'm no longer trying to win the conversation. I'm trying to protect the outcome. Sometimes the best outcome is continuing the conversation. Sometimes it's ending it. Sometimes it's saying yes, and sometimes it's saying no. Sometimes it's saying, I'll think about it. Winning is temporary. Good decisions have much longer lives. The room always gets quieter. Have you ever noticed that the calmest person in the room often changes the entire room? Think about that. One person starts yelling, another person doesn't. One person starts insulting, another person stays respectful. One person creates chaos, another person creates order. Eventually, people stop watching the loudest person. They start watching the calm one. Why? Because calm creates contrast. Contrast creates credibility. I'm not saying silence always wins. Life doesn't work that way. Sometimes you need to speak. Sometimes you need to object. And sometimes you need to confront. But even then, your words carry more weight when they come from thought instead of impulse. Remember that. Your goal isn't to become the quietest person. Your goal is to become the person who chooses silent. It was uncomfortable because nobody knew what silence was trying to teach them. Think about that. All right, here we go. The response window. I want to leave you with one final framework. I call it the response window because somewhere between what happens and what you choose to do, there's a window. Sometimes it's only a few seconds. Sometimes it's a few minutes. Sometimes it's a few days. Inside that window, you have something that nobody can take from you. Choice. Think about that. Life doesn't always let you choose what happens. You don't choose every criticism, every disappointment, every misunderstanding, every betrayal, every setback. But you almost always have some choice about your response. And sometimes that response isn't to wait. Not because you're avoiding the issue, because you're respecting the importance of your next decision. What I had to learn. One of the biggest, hardest lessons I've ever learned is not every moment requires my voice. Sometimes it requires my attention. There were times I thought if I could just explain myself one more time, people would finally understand. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't, and I realized something. Not everyone is listening to understand. Some people are listening to reply. Some people are listening to defend. Some people are listening to judge, but every once in a while you meet someone who is generally listening. To learn. Become that person. Because those people change conversations. They change relationships. They change organizations. Sometimes they change history. Not because they've spoke more, because they've understood more. Silence isn't empty. People often say silence is empty. I don't think that's true. Silence is full. It's full of observation, full of patience, full of discipline, full of curiosity, full of wisdom, waiting to become words. Think about the people whose opinions carry the most weight. They usually aren't the people who speak first. They're often the people who speak after they've thought. That's not weakness, that's restraint. And restraint is one of the purest forms of strength. The final thought. I want to leave you with one question. Not one you'll answer tonight, one you'll answer every to make a better decision. And better decisions build better lives. My name is Leroy Nellis. This is Resilience Radio. Silence has taught me that wisdom isn't measured by how quickly we answer. It's measured by how carefully we choose our words. The world will always encourage speed, faster opinions, faster judgments, faster reactions. But your greatest decisions deserve something better. They deserve your full attention. Remember this. Silence isn't the absence of communication. It's the birthplace of understanding. So the next time someone pressures you to answer immediately, pause, think, observe, listen, because you don't have to win the next sentence. You have to make the next decision, and that decision may change the rest of your life. Until the next time, protect your peace, guard your mind, choose your words with intention. Godspeed, stand for the Constitution, and never surrender your ability to think for yourself. I'm Leroy Nellis. This is Resilience Radio. I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, God bless, and good night.
You pushed me down, thought I'd stay on the ground, counting me out like the numbers didn't matter. But pressure builds diamonds in the dark, and I've been sharpening my edge in the chatter. Every scar turned into strategy, every setback fueled my clarity. I took the hits, learned the game, turned my losses into flame. Now I'm coming back strong, and you'll remember my name. I'm rising through the fire.